Edward II, a royal eye for the straight knight. King Edward I was a great and mighty king who loved to fight and drink. A man's man, he was known as a hammerer of the Scotch for the amount of booze he could put away, and he would still be ready for a battle first thing in the morning. The only thing that really troubled him was his son, the future Edward II. The strange youth didn't seem at all warlike like his father, and as for booze, it was rumoured that the only thing he would touch was gin. His favourite companion was a flamboyant young knight named Piers Gaveston. Together the pair would spend their time giggling, whispering, and criticising the facial hair of the king's favourite knights. When the gruff Edward found out that his son had been skipping his jousting lessons to hang around in the woods reading French poetry, he realised something had to be done. Edward I sat his son down and explained that his behaviour was most unkingly, that England needed a rough warrior ruler, but young Edward refused to listen and flounced petulantly off to his chamber, where he locked the door and refused to come out. For several days the king waited patiently, even pushing plates of food under the door, but eventually he lost his temper and broke it down. A rope was dangling from the window, and his son was nowhere to be seen. In a fit of panic, the king ordered that the kingdom be scoured for his whereabouts. It was a full 3 days before news came back. The prince had been discovered disgustingly drunk in a tavern in the village of Vauxhall, surrounded by sailors and listening to minstrels from the continent. The king went very red and called for his sword. Then he clutched his left arm and collapsed. Edward II's coronation was an uneasy one. England was in trouble. The Scots were massed on the border, and the Welsh were ready to revolt. Nonetheless, Edward II stood up and vowed to give the country the leadership it needed. He announced that he would form a council of 5 leaders to govern the kingdom, and that all the barons were to report to the Tower that very evening to receive further instructions from him. When the barons arrived, they found that Edward had been busy. The rushes that normally carpeted the floor of the great hall had been removed and replaced by a great beige carpet. The stone walls of the hall had been tastefully decorated with tapestries from Italy, and the torches that lit the room had been replaced with soft candles. "What wrongness is this?" roared the burly Earl of Arundel. "I quite like it, actually," said the Earl of Pembroke. "Very minimalist." "Seize the Earl of Arundel!" Edward shouted, leaping out from behind a silk drape. "There are going to be some changes around here." Quick as a flash, Piers Gaveston and 4 handsome, clean-cut knights charged out from the 4 corners of the room, grabbed the Earl of Arundel, and bundled him outside screaming. The other barons watched in fearful silence. Certain that Arundel was to die the traitor's death of hanging, drawing, and quartering, they said not a word. The Earl was dragged through the streets of London to a merchant's house, where he was bound and tied tightly to a firm chair. One of the knights drew out a wicked-looking blade and held it to the Earl's throat. Arundel closed his eyes and prepared for death. But death did not come. Instead, a band of minstrels somewhere in the room struck up a cheery and catchy tune. Arundel opened his eyes and realised that the handsome knight was actually shaving off his great bushy beard. Alarmed, he looked around to see the king staring at him with a look of great concentration. "Style emergency!" cried Edward. "Go, go, go, fab knights!" The Earl struggled and strained, but it was no good. The knights shaved him clean, cut his hair into a fetching cut that framed his face, and went about his eyebrows with a pair of tweezers. Next, the Earl's armour was stripped off, and he was plunged into a hot bath, pulled out, roughly dried off, and dressed in a contemporary tunic with gold embroidery and a pair of Italian leather boots. The knights bundled him onto a horse and galloped him to the palace kitchens, where one fab knight showed him how to prepare a sushi dinner and talked him through the finer points of contemporary music. Finally, he was ridden back home to his castle, where Edward and another of his fab knights redecorated his banqueting hall. The next day, the barons were astonished to see the Earl of Arundel walk into the great hall of the Tower of London, not only alive, but smelling nice, looking clean, and walking with a distinct spring in his step. "Well?" said Edward. "Well," replied the Earl slowly, "Mrs. Arundel was impressed." "How impressed?" said Edward. "Like 4 times impressed," the Earl roared. The barons looked at each other in silence for a moment, and then the chamber descended into uproar. Edward and his 5 knights found themselves very busy indeed that year. The chronicler Adam Murimuth wrote, "Despite a few early reservations, every baron and knight in the kingdom eventually lined up for their services. Castles were redecorated in bright and tasteful themes. French wine was not only drunk, but discussed over dinner. The medicinal spa at Bath did a roaring trade, as did tailors, hair-cutters, and fingernail buffers. At the centre of it all, Edward II was celebrated far and wide as the leading light of a new golden age. It could have lasted forever, were it not for the revolutionary new beauty treatment which arrived from France in 1327. With the benefit of hindsight, red-hot poker colonic irrigation was obviously a step too far." The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe and press the wee bell notification. And a huge big thank you to all my subscribers and patrons. See you next week. Bye bye.